The anonymous bank account in Switzerland is probably the most misunderstood tool in international banking. Top advisors, trustees, and even bankers will give you conflicting information about your options. But anonymous Swiss accounts aren't anything new. For almost a century, they were the ultimate form of asset protection used by the super rich to build wealth offshore, untouched by taxes and regulations. In this video, we're going to pull back the curtain, tell you what's possible today, and share how you can access your own anonymous Swiss bank account. But before we get started, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you get alerted every time we post new non-resident banking opportunities. Here at GlobalBanks, we help individuals and businesses unlock the benefits of international banking by helping them find and open accounts with the best banks around the world. To help you get started, we have a free non-resident banking starter guide designed to help non-resident and foreigners open accounts in top banking jurisdictions like Switzerland. So don't forget to download your copy using the link in the description below. Now, back to anonymous Swiss accounts. Their popularity kicked off in the 20s when France dramatically increased tax rates, forcing the wealthy to look for safe havens for their personal wealth. Switzerland was a popular choice. The original appeal of an anonymous bank account in Switzerland was threefold: unbreakable privacy, tax minimization, and sophisticated banking services not available elsewhere. The thinking back then was simple. If you had an anonymous bank account in Switzerland that nobody knew about, you didn't have to report it or pay taxes on it. But times have changed, and the reasons for wanting an anonymous bank account in Switzerland and the options for acquiring one have changed as well. What hasn't changed is the meaning of an anonymous bank account in Switzerland, which is also known as a Swiss numbered account. It's basically a bank account where the identity of the account owner is replaced with a multi-digit number or code name. And the account owner's identity and account details are only accessible to the client and a small circle of staff at the bank. Originally, the account owner's name and account number were written on an index card, which would then be placed in the bank's safe and was only accessible to the banker or their boss. Then, the client deposited money in the anonymous account, and the private banker would invest it on their behalf. Typically, the funds were invested abroad, outside of Switzerland, in foreign stocks, bonds, and various investments. For example, in the 1970s, 33% of all US stocks were owned by foreigners in Switzerland. But here's where things started to make foreign governments angry. It was the account owner's responsibility to report the account to tax authorities in their home country. The account owner didn't declare the account. It was nearly impossible for a foreign tax authority to find out the account even existed. And unfortunately, many owners didn't declare or pay taxes on their anonymous accounts in Switzerland, which eventually brought down the whole system. That's right, anonymous Swiss accounts don't really exist today in the same way that they used to, but you still have other options you can consider. You see, anonymous bank accounts in Switzerland have undergone radical changes over the years. For example, before 1992, there were two different types of accounts in Switzerland, Form A and Form B. The Form A account was a standard bank account which included the name of the beneficial owner. In other words, the Swiss bank knew the real identity of the account owner. But Form B accounts were different. They had zero information about the beneficial owner and could be opened by a lawyer, accountant, or a third-party service provider. And the bank had no clue who the real owner was. This was a huge loophole. Not surprisingly, it attracted billions in deposits to Switzerland. On top of that, Switzerland's banking laws included the concept of banker-client privilege, which was just like attorney-client privilege. That meant Swiss banks and bankers weren't allowed to divulge details about you or your money to anyone, including foreign governments. So, for example, what some people did was create an offshore holding company with nominee directors or with bearer shares, and then hired a lawyer to open a Form B bank account for the company. This made it impossible for anyone to identify beneficial owners, and the bank had no clue who the account owner was. All of this was based off of multiple layers of privacy and legal protections built into Swiss laws and regulations. But then, in 1992, the rules changed and Form B accounts were abolished. This made it slightly more difficult for criminals, drug traffickers, and dictators, as well as their lawyers, to open anonymous bank accounts in Switzerland. Fortunately for the Swiss banks, Switzerland still had bulletproof banking secrecy laws, banker-client privilege, and it was still illegal for Swiss banks to divulge details about their clients to foreign governments. In other words, if a foreigner opened a bank account in Switzerland, Swiss banks were not allowed to tell foreign tax authorities about it. And since foreign governments still couldn't crack the Swiss banking code, most people thought their undeclared Swiss accounts were safe. So, foreigners continued opening anonymous bank accounts in Switzerland to avoid tax in their home countries. Swiss banks were sworn to secrecy and the foreign governments couldn't force them to reveal anything. Quick tip, laws, well, they change, and secrets can be spilled no matter what. So it's better to play by the rules and make sure your banking and reporting is always above board. Unfortunately, plenty of Swiss banking clients, they found this out the hard way. You see, it all came crashing down when an American banker named Bradley found his way into Swiss banking giant UBS. Today, Brad is an infamous character in Swiss banking history. His actions blew the lid off Swiss banking secrecy and changed Switzerland forever. Brad worked for UBS in the 2000s. His goal? Attract as many wealthy US clients to Switzerland as humanly possible. Americans, they wanted to open bank accounts in Switzerland to avoid paying tax to the US government. And Brad, he helped them do that. Then the US government said it was illegal to help Americans evade taxes. So Brad quit, blew the whistle, and tattletaled on UBS. In the process, he gave the US government everything it needed to blow up Swiss banking secrecy once and for all. That included tearing down the banking laws surrounding it and forcing Swiss banks to divulge information on their US citizen clients for the first time in history. Over the past decade, 3 major catalysts destroyed Swiss bank secrecy and anonymous accounts. First, new AML, KYC, and CFT laws were adopted. Then, the US government forced banks everywhere to comply with FATCA. Finally, Swiss banks now have to comply with the Common Reporting Standard, or CRS. So today, all Swiss banks are now legally required to identify the ultimate owner, a UBO, and automatically send client information to foreign tax authorities in accordance with FATCA and CRS. In other words, bank secrecy, it's dead. Anonymous bank accounts no longer exist, and hiding money offshore literally isn't possible anymore. And privacy and tax minimization now take the form of trusts, foundations, corporate structures, and proper tax planning. Now, let's take a look at the realities of anonymous accounts today. It's true that anonymous bank accounts in Switzerland no longer exist in the same way that they used to. But there are some alternatives that still allow similar benefits, though reporting and disclosure requirements are entirely dependent on who you are, where you live, where you report taxes, and other considerations. As always, be sure to check with your lawyer, accountant, or tax advisor before making any decisions. You see, people still use countries like Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Panama, and Belize, and elsewhere to achieve the same objectives as an anonymous bank account. But instead of holding the bank accounts directly as individuals, they do so through foundations, trusts, or other entities. We'll dive into some of the banking options related to setting up such structures in a future video. So, with this knowledge, the question remains, should you open a Swiss bank account? Regardless of their lack of anonymity, Swiss banks, they can still offer a lot of benefits to certain people. So the answer to this question depends entirely on you and your objectives. For example, Switzerland and Swiss banks can be great for individuals looking to access high-quality wealth management services. Of course, there are other jurisdictions that you can consider as well. Likewise, depending on your citizenship and residency, you may find that there are other private banking jurisdictions better suited to your needs. Or, if you're from certain countries, Switzerland might be the perfect fit. All things considered, Switzerland is still one of the best banking jurisdictions in the world, with some of the best banks in terms of financial stability and management. So if you're thinking about banking here, it's certainly worth considering. But regardless of whether you're looking to open an account for yourself, a foundation, trust, or a company, you need to ensure you find the right bank and the right banker to match your objectives. And with that, we can help. Our team has spent hundreds of hours meeting with banks, opening accounts, and collecting first-hand experiences in Switzerland. We did this because Switzerland is one of the best banking jurisdictions in the world. But banking in Switzerland isn't easy. And given how great of a destination Switzerland is for banking, it should be no surprise how difficult it can be to find and get accepted by the right bank. This is because banks in Switzerland can afford to pick and choose who they accept. They run a tight operation and only want the best clients. In other words, unless you know which banks, branches, and bankers to speak with, you could very quickly find yourself wasting a lot of time and a lot of money trying to open an account. If you'd prefer to save your time and money, you can join our flagship service, GlobalBanks Insider, instead. With GlobalBanks Insider, you'll get instant access to our entire archive of banking intelligence reports, access to the GlobalBanks database, home to more than 250 banks from 50+ countries, including detailed bank profiles, client preferences, and a whole lot more. Finally, you'll also get real-time analyst support from our team of experts, ready to answer your most pressing banking questions and to make suggestions on which banks in Switzerland and elsewhere will best meet your objectives. To get started, just click the link in the description below to learn more about GlobalBanks Insider. And before signing off, don't forget to hit subscribe so you get alerted every time we share new banking opportunities. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.